Chapter 3. God works through agreement. I and the Father are one. On the night before Jesus' crucifixion, he said to his disciples, I am the true vine, and my Father is the husbandman. I am the vine, ye are the branches. Without me you can do nothing. What does this parable mean? It tells you that nobody in this world stands alone. Everybody and everything is related to something else, and each originates with God the Creator. You can get away from the Father's house, but you cannot get away from yourself. When you think of your personal self as an independent source of power, you lose that power. Not because God has turned his back on you, but because you, a branch, have separated yourself from the vine. Do you see the lesson Jesus was setting forth in this parable? It was a lesson of relationship. I and the Father are one. This is the message of the New Testament. Your life, your power, your health, your happiness depends upon your acceptance of God. As the branch is dependent upon its oneness with the vine, and the vine is dependent upon its oneness with the ground, so man is dependent with his awareness and acceptance of his oneness with the Father within. Did you ever read the small print on the stub of a railroad ticket? It says, subject conditions and contract of this ticket and void that is not good if detached. Now apply that statement to life. Think of the many things that which the provision applies to. Vacuum cleaners, electric lights, fans, toasters, telephone, dishwasher. These gadgets are called appliances. They must be applied to something else before they function. Break the connection, separate them, detach them, and they are useless. The starter in your car is no good unless it is attached to the battery. The water pipes in your home are useless unless they are attached to the reservoir. Your hand is powerless without your arm. Your physical brain is no good without your mind. You are no good without you. You do not enter into your inheritance without your conscious acceptance of your oneness with God. This brings us to the great difficulty in spiritual work, the presence of both the human and the superhuman factors in our nature, the two distinct and divergent selves that operate in us. St. Paul said, there is a natural body and there is a spiritual body. The natural body is the manifest or physical side which faces the outer world of sense. The spiritual body is the unmanifest side which faces the inner world of spirit. You may think of yourself and speak of yourself as being one self, but remember that actually you are two selves. Within you are two of you, you and yourself, a human self and a God self, a personal self and a Christ self, a lower self and a higher self, a little self and a big self, an outer self and an inner self, a me and an I, a divided self and a united self, one self on earth and the other self in heaven. By yourself, the physical and mental self, you are only half a self. With your spiritual self, you are a whole self. You can succeed in your spiritual endeavors only when the two phases of your life operate together for good. Edwin Sanford Martin, under the title, My Name is Legion, expressed the problem fittingly. Within my earthly temple there's a crowd. There's one of us that's humble, one that's proud. There's one that's broken-hearted for his sins. There's one that unrepentant sits and grins. There's one that loves his neighbor as himself, and one that cares for naught but fame and self. From which corroding care I should be free, if I could once determine which is me. That's my problem, and it is yours. This split personality must come to terms with itself. The higher self must be given an opportunity to organize and control the lower self. The I and me must get together. Since the contrasting phases of your being complement one another, and each is an extension of every other phase, you cannot live successfully in one part of your being at the expense of any other part. It is a great day in your life when you recognize that your struggle is not with the world but with yourself. The conflict is dissolved when you realize that the adjustment must take place in your mind rather than in your environment, and then make that adjustment. The spiritual you is not disturbed by the passage of time, nor by the variations of the experience, because it is changeless, timeless, and immovable. Living on the higher side of your being, you are under grace. You are not righteous, good, well, strong, or prosperous because of some affirmation or statement of truth, but because you are in Christ. On this side of your being, you are surrounded by a mighty force which does not know lack, limitation, or disease. You are immersed in a presence which permeates everything and binds all together in one harmonious whole. You live, move, and have your being in a mind which knows you by what you know about yourself. You are one with God. You are one with the source of all creation. You are one with the substance of all form. You are greater than anything that can ever happen to you. Living on the spiritual side of your nature, you discover that you do not create anything. You merely become aware of that which already is. You stop trying to change your world by force, for you know that it is controlled by your attitude toward it. You know that what you release is consciousness, is expressed on the relative plane. Keeping your attention on the truth of being, you are not concerned with turmoil and trouble. You know all things work together for good to them that love God. You know that there is not God in health. There is only God manifest as health. The chair you are sitting on is not a chair in wood. You cannot separate the wood from the chair. The wood is manifest as the chair. All goodness, perfection, beauty, loveliness, and truth are God made manifest. There is nothing without him. There is everything with him. You are alive because he is alive, free because he is free, rich because he is rich, whole because he is whole, radiant and victorious because that is his nature. The lower self, composed of body, personality, and intellect, is the sense consciousness that connects you with the outer world. It was of the lower self that Isaiah spoke when he said, "But we are all as an unclean thing, and our righteousnesses are as filthy rags, and we all do fade as a leaf, and our iniquities, like the wind, have taken us away," to which Jesus referred when he said, "For this corruptible lower self must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality." This does not mean that the lower self is destitute of spirit, but that it is spiritually asleep. Its potential is unrealized. Only its intellectual and sense natures are awake, untouched by the spirit. Its greater power lies dormant. Did you ever have a straight talk with yourself? Then do so now. Stand before a mirror, look yourself squarely in the eye, and ask yourself these questions, listening closely to the answers that you hear. Who am I? The answer comes back, I am John Smith. Who is John Smith? John Smith is my personality. What is personality? It is the sum total of all my thinking, feeling, and acting on the relative plane. It is that part of myself which I have built up. It is, as the word persona indicates, a mask, a sort of false face. It is a false and wrong relation to life. It is my lower self, which is in constant state of change, and being a thing of imagination, it is capricious, unpredictable, and unreliable. Some natures refer to the me or personality as the part of man's nature which is at variance or out of tune with God. Personality is the self of duality, always fluctuating between good and evil, heaven and hell, feast and famine, darkness or light, joy and sorrow, prosperity or poverty, health and sickness. It is the self that is always getting in your way, the self that is easily hurt, neglected, downtrodden, taken advantage of, the self that allows anger, fear, worry, and resentment to poison its whole system. Functioning from the plane of the relative, it does not know how to embody the truth of itself. Having lost its spiritual identification, it is always contradicting and denying its good. It does not realize that its failures, limitations, and suffering are indeed by its own self-centeredness, self-will, self-love, self-righteousness, and self-justification. Living chiefly on the surface and gathering information from the outer world, it attracts all the annoyances, limitations, inhibitions, and miseries of the race. Knowing both good and evil, it is under the law of chance, contagion, disintegration, decay, heredity, and environment. Dwelling in this self, you disturb the normal functioning of the body. You do not solve your problems, for you recognize them as part of yourself. In a divided mind, your idea of yourself is that you are strong or weak, fortunate or unfortunate, capable or incapable, brave or cowardly, healthy or sick, prosperous or poor, perfect or imperfect, master or slave. You are either happy or unhappy, peaceful or discordant. You move erratically with the tide or against it. You are never consistent, never stabilized, never at peace. You are torn between self-approval and self-condemnation. St. Paul said, "The natural man, or the personality, receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for he is in conflict with himself. The flesh and the spirit, the old man and the new, Babylon and the New Jerusalem are in a state of warfare." When you think of these two selves as the self I seem to be, and the self I am, you understand the statement, "There shall be two in the field, the one shall be taken and the other left." Now you see why the lower self must be reversed. St. Paul tells us, "By grace are ye saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, or not of the personality, it is the gift of God." Grace, the dictionary tells us, is the state of reconciliation to God through Jesus Christ. The soul, the subconscious and neutral self, is the repository of experience, thoughts, feelings, memories, impulses, and emotions. It bridges the outer and the inner world. It is both conscious and subconscious. It is aware or conscious in two directions. The Bible Metaphysical Dictionary tells us it touches both the inner realm of spirit, from which it receives direct inspiration, and the external world, from which it receives impressions. Through the soul, you identify yourself with one side of your nature or the other. You identify yourself with the I or the me. On one side of the soul is the fugitive, transitory, self-lighting, struggling, and dying day by day. On the other side is the spiritual self, which has never been born, never gets sick, and never dies, the self that says, I am. You designate yourself as carnal or spiritual, according to the self or nature in which you live. The soul determines the condition of the body, its degree of health, vitality, resiliency. It is the place in which you accept the truth or deny it. It is the field in which the Holy Spirit does its work. Where and when does this changeover from the me to the I take place? There is no place but here, and no time but now. You become a new creature not by dying, but by accepting your right position in the law. You make the change when you turn from where and what you seem to be to where and what you are. Instead of accepting the corruptible self of the human mind, you see that you are the immortal self of divine mind. To achieve this integration is the ultimate in spiritual attainment. It occurs when the words of Jesus, I and the Father are one, become the truth for you. But to stay on the vine, to remain integrated with your source, you must first place things right. The first of the 10 Commandments is, Thou shalt have no other gods before me. And Jesus followed it with, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. Jesus said, If any man will come after me, identify himself with me, let him deny himself, drop his personality, take up his cross, cross out the lower self, and follow me, put on the new man, which is Christ. Having discovered the spiritual self, you let the personal self die. You refuse to act, live and think through the me. That is what Jesus meant by denying yourself, taking up your cross and following him. By constantly yielding the personal self to the spiritual self, you crucify the personal self or cross it out, and the spiritual self comes forth in resurrection. The Master gave us the law back on this creative process in the words, If 2 of you shall agree on earth as touching anything they shall ask, it shall be done for them of my Father which is in heaven. There can be no agreement so long as you accept a sense of separation, nor can there be oneness, wholeness, or completeness. The spiritual man has power only as the identity is maintained. The word Isaiah used is stayed. Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee. Let the lower self obtrude itself at any time in the process it's interrupted. St. Paul said, I die daily. The faster you die to personality, the more quickly the real you comes to life. On another occasion he said, I keep under my body, or personality, and bring it into subjection. When you cease to believe in a personal man in difficulty and trouble, the saying, It is no longer I that live, but Christ liveth in me, is fulfilled. By holding fast to the knowledge that your real self is spiritual, you come at last into the realization of that self. But you must remember that you have set out to break the most formidable and fixed habit in your life. In reversing yourself, you are not only displacing the false with the true, changing the very basics of your being, but you are transcending the race mind of the world. You will meet barriers, obstacles, delays, disappointments, recessions, and setbacks in your process. But these are not the deciding factors in your success. Personality would get back into the saddle from time to time, but if you keep moving toward your goal, these intrusions are much like the backward and forward movements of a speeding train. It doesn't really make any difference whether you move to the front of the train or to the back. You are still proceeding to your destination. Separating the real self from personality is very much like purifying a glass of muddy water by the introduction of clear water. By the steady dropping of pure water into the glass, the muddy water is washed out. Just so the personal self is displaced by the constant recognition of the spiritual self. Are you ready to take the step? Are you ready to lay down your sense of the personal self and take up the cross which cancels it? Then you must contemplate and study the self which is waiting to be revealed by your awareness and acceptance. If the personal self is the spiritual self unrealized, you must have a clear picture of the self you wish to express. You must know that this self is. You must accept your oneness with it. What does it mean to become one with anything? It means that you become that thing. To become one with the spiritual self is to become that self in action. Jesus knew that man's struggle for health, peace, happiness, and plenty would come to an end only as he rid himself of personality. When followers sought to exalt and worship his personality, he said, "Call me not good," realizing that personality is the root of all man's trouble. Then he gave them the remedy. Now also the axe is laid unto the root of the tree. Therefore every tree which bringeth not forth good fruit is hewn down and cast into the fire. What was he talking about? He was talking about the tree of life, consciousness. To reverse the self, you must work with consciousness. You must not only withdraw your thought and attention from personality with its doubts, tears, worries, and sins, but you must also raise yourself to the Christ consciousness which makes these destructive states impossible. When a tree is cut down at its root, it stops bearing fruit. When the personal self ceases to function in your life, you may be said to have laid the axe unto the root of the tree. Acquaint now thyself with him and be at peace. Acquaint yourself with him by trying to imagine just how this new self will affect your life. How will it affect your business, home, job, profession, your family, friends, and associates? How would it affect you right now if you were everything you long to be? How would you think if the ultimate thinker were thinking through you? How would you act if you accepted God as the only source of action in your life? How would you feel if Christ fell through you? How would you look if the Holy Spirit looked through you? How would you face difficulties, circumstances, conditions in your new individuality? No one ever loses his individuality. Each man is unique. His God-given possession of the power to choose ensures this uniqueness. He loses his sense of personality in his constant identification with his spiritual self, but never his individuality. Now there are diversities of gifts, but the same Spirit. Face that spiritual self as if you were trying to recall all that you once were. Jesus didn't ask for a new body, a new self, a new mind, a new will, or a new environment, but said, "O Father, glorify thou me with thine own self, with the glory which I had with thee before the world was." St. John said, "He, the spiritual self, must increase, but I, the personal self, must decrease." Every time arbitrary, vindictive, and selfish thoughts appear in your consciousness, they must be cast out and replaced by truth. To everyone you must say, "That thought is not I, and I refuse to express it." Then turn your attention to the spiritual self, to everything that is desirable, good, positive, and constructive, to everything that represents your highest concept of the Christ self. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are of good report, think on these things. St. Paul gave us these words in the long ago. Make the spiritual self the acting center or magnet of your consciousness by contemplating its attributes. Contemplate the statements on page 44 with deep feeling and penetration, and affirm when you come to the end of each statement, "That is what I am in truth." Do this every morning and evening, whenever your thought is not actively engaged, and when it tends to revert to its old pattern. Remember that to be free from the personal self, you must be free in it. You must handle all intruding thoughts and consciousness. Declare that the spiritual self is in absolute control at all times, and it is now governing you, your mind, your problems, your affairs, and your circumstances, and your environment. When you know that Christ governs everything in your life, and expect that government to operate in your affairs, nothing but good can be objectified in your experience. What did Jesus mean when he said, "Ye must be born again"? He meant the very thing we are talking about. That which is born of the flesh is flesh, and that which is born of the Spirit is spirit. Jesus said, "I am come that ye might have life, and have it more abundantly." Can you have anything until you claim it? Can you be the spiritual self until you realize that you are that self? Can you think like Christ until you accept his mind? St. Paul tells us that when Christ, who is our life, shall appear, then shall ye also appear with him in glory. When you have embodied the spiritual self to the point at which the subjective mind accepts it, when you have convinced yourself that it is you, when it becomes active in your living, thinking, and acting, you may have been said to have been born again. You can then speak your word with authority because it is the Christ self speaking with you. What does that statement, I and the Father are one, mean to you by this time? Do you understand that God occupies the same space that you do, that in his presence you find the real you? When you are conscious of your oneness with God, you embody him. All that God is, you are. Is that a figment of the author's imagination? Not at all. The Father said to the prodigal's brother, Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine, so God speaks to you. The law is exact. If you would have unlimited peace, poise, and power, you must accept your oneness. You must make your acceptance so wholehearted that he blends with you and you blend with him. God is consciousness. Nothing exists as it is part of his consciousness. You are consciousness. Consciousness demonstrates itself. God is the life, law, and substance of all form. When you realize your unity, you have dominion. If you don't realize it, you have no comprehension of its effect on you or of the changes it would bring to your life. The consciousness of your unity with God is the starting point of every prayer. If ye abide in me, and my words abide in ye, ye shall ask what ye will, and it shall be done unto you. God can work through you only when your consciousness and his consciousness are one. You know then that you are one with all power, for you have discovered that there is no power other than that of mind. You demonstrate the kingdom of God because you recognize it as your own state of mind. You have learned that the purpose of your prayers is to clear the way for your acceptance of your oneness with principle. Your success in demonstrating truth lies in your ability to put all beliefs in John Smith, the personality, out of consciousness. All things are yours, Jesus said. That is, all things are manifested through your acceptance of your oneness with God. The struggle is now over. You have now been born again. You have embodied a new self. You have discovered a new way of thinking. You have discovered a scientific way of doing things. You have discovered a law that externalizes only happiness and good. You have integrated the two selves. They are now in agreement and function spiritually. Who are you? You are the highest of God's creations. You have dominion. You are crowned with honor and glory. You are the power which knows no limitation or conditions. Your nets are full of fish right in the place where personality said there were none. Despite your present circumstances, something in you, something that is not your body or your brain, something universal, eternal, and indefinable, something aligned to the larger world, something that never changes, something that knows you as itself, tells you these things are true. It is the real you speaking. End of chapter.